Chosen one, a massive argument just broke out over you, and they're feeling embarrassed at trying to compete with you. While you've been ascending into your divine frequency, chaos has erupted in their world because they finally understand the devastating truth. Everything they tried to steal from you, everything they attempted to replicate, everything they boasted they could take, it all backfired, so spectacularly that their entire operation is crumbling before their eyes. The universe has spoken, and the verdict is final. Authentic power cannot be counterfeited, and those who tried to compete with what you naturally embody are now drowning in the consequences of their spiritual arrogance. Someone needs to sit down. Someone needs to hear some news that's going to shake them to their core. But it's not you. You've already passed the test they couldn't even comprehend was happening. While they were planning your downfall, the universe was orchestrating your greatest ascension. The irony is so perfect it would be beautiful if it weren't so devastating for those who bet against you. They've been watching you with new people entering your life, cataloging every connection you make, every door that opens for you, every blessing that flows your way. Their eyes tell a story of increasing desperation as they realize something they never anticipated. You keep winning without even trying to compete. One of them, the one who had been impersonating you on social media platforms, was particularly vocal about the upcoming spiritual heist. By the end of the night, they laughed during a live stream to their deceived followers. "They'll be putty in our hands. All that healing ability, all that manifestation power, all that divine connection, it'll be flowing through us instead." Their partner, equally delusional but perhaps slightly more cautious, had been documenting your daily routines, your spiritual practices, even your physical appearance with obsessive detail. They had created entire folders of screenshots, videos, and written observations about your energy signature. In their twisted logic, they believed that understanding the external manifestations of your gifts would somehow grant them access to the internal source. What they didn't understand is that your power isn't something you possess, it's something you are. You can't steal someone's essence any more than you can steal their DNA and expect it to work in your body. But they had to learn this lesson the hard way, and the learning would cost them everything they thought they had built. The night they chose for their spiritual assault was the night everything changed, not just for you, but for everyone involved in their little conspiracy. While you slept peacefully, protected by forces they couldn't comprehend, they descended into your dreams like amateur thieves breaking into a fortress. They expected to find vulnerability. Instead, they found something that would haunt them for the rest of their lives. Your guides were waiting for them, not just any guides, but the kind of spiritual protection that comes only to those who have earned it through genuine service and authentic growth. These weren't the fluffy, Instagram-friendly spirits that populate New Age fantasies. These were ancient, powerful entities who take the violation of sacred space very seriously. Do you remember that night? How your sleep was deeper than it had been in months? How you dreamed of golden light surrounding you like an impenetrable cocoon? While you rested in divine protection, chaos was erupting in the spiritual realm around you. Your attackers found themselves face to face with guardians they had never imagined could exist. The attack failed spectacularly. Not only did they fail to access what they came for, but they found themselves trapped in a spiritual labyrinth of their own making. The very techniques they used to try to breach your consciousness became the bars of their own prison. One by one, they realized they couldn't find their way back to their own bodies, couldn't escape the nightmare realm they had created by attempting to violate someone under divine protection. The impersonator experienced something particularly terrifying during the attack. They found themselves face to face with their own shadow, forced to confront every lie they had told, every authentic moment they had stolen from your life and claimed as their own. The spiritual realm showed them a mirror that reflected not who they pretended to be, but who they really were, empty, desperate, and profoundly disconnected from any genuine source of power. But the real devastation wasn't happening in the spiritual realm, it was happening in their physical lives. The moment they launched their attack against you, the universe began systematically dismantling everything they had built on false foundations. Bank accounts were frozen for suspicious activity. Marriages that had been held together by mutual greed began crumbling as partners finally saw each other clearly. Legal troubles that had been building for years suddenly accelerated, demanding immediate attention. That morning after their failed attack, you woke up with more energy than you'd had in years. Colors seemed brighter, food tasted better, and that persistent heaviness you'd carried for months had simply vanished. You probably attributed it to finally getting a good night's sleep, but something much more profound had occurred. The energetic cords they had been using to drain your vitality had been severed permanently. The psychic interference that had been clouding your intuition was completely cleared. For the first time in over a year, you were operating at full capacity, and the difference was immediately noticeable to everyone around you. The argument that would expose everything started with a simple question from an unexpected source. A mother-in-law, who had always suspected something wasn't right, finally decided to speak up. She had been watching too, but not with predatory intent. She had been watching with the protective instincts of someone who could smell deception from miles away. This woman had been observing the increasing chaos in her family's life, the financial instability that seemed to worsen despite claims of spiritual abundance, the personality changes in her daughter-in-law that suggested someone living a double life. She had done her own research, discovered the real person behind the stolen content, and had been quietly gathering evidence. "What exactly have you accomplished?" she asked during what was supposed to be a celebration dinner. "You keep talking about all these powers you have, all these spiritual connections, but your life is falling apart, your partner is miserable, you're constantly asking for money. When is all this supposed power going to actually manifest something positive?" The question hung in the air like a sword waiting to fall, because how do you explain that you've been living a lie so completely that you've started believing it yourself? How do you tell someone that your entire spiritual practice consists of copying someone else's homework and hoping no one notices? The argument that followed was volcanic. Years of suppressed doubts erupted into the open. Partners who had been enabling each other's delusions suddenly saw the pathetic reality of their situation. The one who had been posing as you online, claiming your experiences as their own, found themselves completely exposed. "You've been pretending to be someone else this entire time," the mother-in-law continued, her voice cutting through their desperate attempts at deflection. "I've seen the real person you're copying. I've seen their work, their genuine spiritual development. You're nothing like them. You're just a cheap imitation trading on someone else's authentic journey." Meanwhile, you were experiencing the most profound healing of your life. Remember how suddenly your chronic pain began to fade, how that persistent anxiety that had plagued you for years simply evaporated, how your intuition became so sharp it was almost overwhelming. Your attackers had unknowingly triggered a quantum leap in your spiritual development. The healing wasn't just emotional or energetic, it was physical, cellular, molecular. That old injury that doctors said would never fully heal suddenly stopped causing pain. The digestive issues that had plagued you for years resolved overnight. The skin condition that had been a source of embarrassment simply disappeared. Your body was literally regenerating itself at an accelerated rate. The exposure was total and merciless. Every lie they had told, every false claim they had made, every stolen piece of your spiritual identity was laid bare. Their online followers began to see through the facade. Videos that had seemed profound now looked hollow and rehearsed. Healing sessions that had appeared powerful now felt manipulative and empty. The mother-in-law had come prepared with evidence, screenshots showing the original sources of stolen content, documentation of financial irregularities, testimonials from people who had been harmed by their fraudulent practices. She laid it all out on the dinner table, like a prosecutor presenting evidence to a jury. But the most devastating revelation was yet to come. During the spiritual attack on you, something else had happened, something they had kept secret from their own partners and collaborators. They had encountered something in your consciousness that they couldn't handle, something that had followed them back and taken up residence in their own energy field. The nightmares started immediately. Not the kind you wake up from and forget, but the kind that bleeds into your waking life and corrupts every moment of peace. They were experiencing what you had learned to transmute years ago, the raw, unfiltered energy of transformation that burns away everything false and leaves only truth in its wake. You probably noticed how your manifestation abilities suddenly accelerated around this time. Projects that had been stalled for months began moving forward with supernatural speed. Money started flowing from unexpected sources. Opportunities appeared as if materialized from thin air. What you didn't realize then was that their energetic interference had been the primary obstacle to your natural abundance. The impersonator began experiencing physical symptoms that no doctor could explain. Severe migraines that felt like their skull was being split open. Nausea that wouldn't respond to any medication. A tremor in their hands that made it impossible to create content. Their body was rejecting the false frequency they had been trying to maintain. Their bodies began breaking down in ways that doctors couldn't explain. The stress of maintaining their lies while being haunted by the consequences of their spiritual trespassing created a perfect storm of physical and mental deterioration. They couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, couldn't concentrate on anything except the growing certainty that they had awakened something they couldn't control. Alert, code red, chosen one. We're growing fast, building an unstoppable media network they can't erase, but let's not sugarcoat it. The truth is still hidden, it's been twisted, it's been buried under censorship, algorithms and fear, yet your heart never stopped recognizing what's real. That's why you're still here, that's why you never tapped out, because you felt the simulation glitch beneath your feet. You know this world is rigged, and you're done waiting for permission to rise. The Obsidian inner order wasn't built for the curious, it was forged for the committed. This is for the full-time chosen, the ones who came to lead, the ones who see beyond the veil and act anyway. Inside, we hold weekly Zoom calls that cut through the noise. We share hidden teachings most were never meant to hear. We train in psychic warfare, strategy, and spiritual technologies they've kept locked away for centuries. This is the toolkit for the real ones, the ungovernable, the impossible to erase. It's time to remember who you are. The link is in the description. Your real life begins inside. The car being towed was just the beginning. When you can't pay for the symbols of success you've been using to maintain your image, those symbols get repossessed. The expensive car that had been proof of their spiritual abundance was dragged away on a flatbed truck while neighbors watched. The house they couldn't actually afford was next. Then came the legal documents, the court dates, the bankruptcy proceedings. Their partner, who had been complicit in the deception but perhaps not fully aware of its extent, made a choice that would accelerate their downfall. When faced with the choice between standing by the lies or protecting their own future, they chose self-preservation. They gathered evidence of the fraud, contacted authorities, and prepared to testify against their former accomplice. As their material world crumbled, your inner world expanded exponentially. You began having prophetic dreams with accuracy that startled you. Your healing abilities became so potent that people sought you out just to be in your presence. The spiritual gifts that had been dormant or suppressed for years suddenly came online with full force, but the physical losses were nothing compared to the spiritual catastrophe they had unleashed. The entity they had encountered in your consciousness, the guardian they had tried to bypass, had marked them, not with malice but with truth. They could no longer maintain the energetic frequency of deception. Every lie they tried to tell immediately collapsed under the weight of reality. Their online presence imploded almost overnight. Videos were taken down, social media accounts were suspended, and former followers began speaking out about the manipulation they had experienced. The carefully constructed image of spiritual authority crumbled like a house of cards in a hurricane. You watched this unfold with a mixture of fascination and compassion. Part of you felt vindicated. Finally, the truth was being revealed. But another part of you felt genuine sadness for souls so lost that they believed stealing someone else's light was their only path to illumination. The most beautiful part of this entire unfolding was how little you had to do with their destruction. You didn't curse them, didn't send negative energy their way, didn't even think about them once their influence was removed from your life. You simply continued growing, continued healing, continued becoming more authentically yourself. Their downfall was entirely self-created, the inevitable result of building a life on someone else's foundation. While their world burned, yours blossomed. The healing abilities that had been developing slowly for years suddenly accelerated exponentially. Physical ailments that had plagued you for decades simply vanished. Mental patterns that had seemed impossible to break dissolved effortlessly. You found yourself accessing knowledge and wisdom that you had never formally learned, as if the universe were downloading information directly into your consciousness. Do you remember the first time someone told you that just being in your presence had healed something they'd been struggling with for years? How you initially dismissed it as coincidence until it happened again and again. That wasn't coincidence, that was your authentic power, finally able to flow without interference. The people who had been watching you with malicious intent were replaced by souls who recognized your light because they carried similar frequencies. Genuine teachers, authentic healers, real spiritual warriors began appearing in your life with synchronistic precision. The fake community that had been draining your energy was replaced by a soul family that amplified your gifts and celebrated your growth. Your financial situation transformed in ways that seemed almost magical to outside observers. Opportunities appeared from nowhere, doors opened without you even knocking. Projects you had started years ago suddenly gained momentum and began generating income. The abundance they had tried to steal from you multiplied exponentially once their energetic interference was removed. But perhaps the most profound change was in your relationship with your own power. The attack they had launched against you had forced you to access levels of spiritual strength you didn't even know you possessed. Like a muscle that grows stronger under resistance, your psychic abilities had evolved rapidly under pressure. You could now see clearly into people's motivations, could sense deception from miles away, could protect yourself with effortless grace. Children began approaching you without fear, drawn by an energy they recognized but couldn't name. Elderly people would open up to you about experiences they had never shared with anyone. Even skeptics found themselves inexplicably calmed by your presence, their rational minds unable to explain the peace they felt around you. The dreams that had once been portals for their attacks became gateways to higher dimensions of knowledge and healing. Your sleep was no longer a vulnerable state, but a time of profound spiritual work and regeneration. You began receiving information that would later prove prophetic, guidance that would save you from making costly mistakes, warnings that would protect you from future predators. In these dream states, you were being trained by master teachers from other realms. They showed you healing techniques that worked on quantum levels, manifestation methods that bypassed the ego mind entirely, and protection protocols that would shield you from any future psychic attacks. You woke each morning with new knowledge that you somehow knew how to apply immediately. The community of authentic healers and conscious souls that formed around you was unlike anything you had experienced before. These weren't the surface-level spiritual connections that characterized New Age circles, but deep, soul-level bonds with people who understood the true cost and responsibility of spiritual power. Together, you began working on projects that would have seemed impossible to your former self. What amazed you most was how little effort any of this required. After years of struggling and forcing outcomes, suddenly everything flowed with divine timing and cosmic support. The right people appeared at the right moments, the necessary resources manifested exactly when needed. Obstacles that should have been insurmountable simply dissolved before you could even worry about them. The contrast with your attacker's experience couldn't have been more stark. While you were ascending effortlessly, they were descending into chaos and confusion. Every door that opened for you seemed to close for them. Every blessing that flowed your way highlighted their increasing isolation and failure. You probably didn't know about the behind-the-scenes drama that was unfolding in their world. The impersonators' marriage was disintegrating in spectacular fashion. Their partner had discovered the extent of their deception and the financial mess they had created through their fraudulent spiritual business. The argument with their mother became the catalyst that brought everything into the light. The legal system began taking interest in their activities. Intellectual property theft, fraud, identity theft, tax evasion. The charges were mounting. Former clients who had been harmed by their fake healing sessions came forward with testimonies. The evidence was overwhelming and irrefutable. The mother-in-law who had started the argument that exposed their deception became an unlikely ally in your protection. Without even knowing you personally, she had recognized the signature of authentic spiritual development and had refused to let the fraud continue in her presence. Her willingness to speak truth to power had catalyzed a chain reaction that would ultimately free several people from the web of lies and manipulation. The person who had been impersonating you online found themselves completely cut off from the source they had been parasitically feeding from. Their content became obviously recycled and hollow. Their healing sessions lost all effectiveness. Their predictions stopped coming true. Their followers began to notice the dramatic decline in quality and started asking uncomfortable questions. Remember when you started getting messages from strangers thanking you for work you didn't remember doing? When people would approach you at spiritual events claiming you had changed their lives through sessions you'd never conducted? That was when you realized the extent of the identity theft that had been occurring. The legal troubles that emerged weren't random or coincidental. The universe has a way of ensuring that those who violate spiritual law also face consequences in physical reality. Fraud charges were filed. Stolen intellectual property was exposed. Financial manipulation was investigated. The same technologies they had used to steal your content became the evidence that would convict them. But even as their world collapsed around them, the most devastating punishment was internal. They had touched something during their attack on you that they were not prepared to integrate. The energy that you had learned to channel and transmute over years of dedicated practice hit their unprepared consciousness like lightning hitting a tree. They were experiencing spiritual awakening as trauma rather than transformation because they had tried to skip the preparation and purification necessary for such expansion. The nightmares they were experiencing weren't random psychological phenomena, but direct feedback from the violation they had attempted. Your guides were showing them exactly what they had tried to steal, and their unprepared minds couldn't process the intensity. They were getting a taste of the responsibility that comes with real spiritual power, and they were cracking under the weight of it. Meanwhile, your own spiritual development was accelerating at a rate that would have been overwhelming if you hadn't been properly prepared through your years of authentic growth. The healing modality that was emerging through you wasn't something you learned from books or workshops, but something that was flowing directly from source through your purified channel. You began understanding why the isolation had been necessary, why certain relationships had to end, why financial struggles had pushed you to develop inner resources. Every challenge you had faced had been preparing you for this moment when your gifts would emerge at full power. People began seeking you out for healing work without you advertising or promoting yourself. Word of mouth spread through spiritual communities about someone who could facilitate rapid, lasting transformation. The waiting list for your services grew longer than you could manage. The financial abundance that naturally accompanied authentic spiritual service began flowing in ways that honored both your gifts and your needs. The most profound healing you were able to facilitate was for those who had been damaged by the same kind of spiritual fraud you had overcome. People who had been manipulated by false teachers, drained by energy vampires, or betrayed by fake spiritual communities found in you someone who could understand their trauma and guide them back to their own authentic connection with Source. Your story became a beacon of hope for others who had experienced similar spiritual attacks and survived. Babos, you began speaking about your experience, not to gain fame or followers, but to help others recognize the signs of spiritual manipulation and learn to protect themselves from predatory practitioners. The circular nature of your journey became beautifully clear. The isolation they had forced upon you had been necessary for your deepest healing and growth. The attack they had launched against you had catalyzed your greatest spiritual breakthrough. The community they had driven you away from had been replaced by something infinitely more authentic and supportive. As their argument about you reached its final explosive conclusion, the last secrets were exposed. The financial backing for their operation had come from sources that were now demanding repayment. The guru they had claimed to study under publicly disavowed them. The credentials they had displayed were revealed to be fraudulent. The testimonials from satisfied clients were exposed as fabrications. You watched all of this unfold with a sense of cosmic justice rather than personal vindication. This wasn't about revenge. This was about truth finally prevailing over deception. The universe was correcting an imbalance that had been distorting the spiritual marketplace for too long. The beautiful irony was that their obsession with competing with you had revealed to the entire spiritual community exactly who you really were. Their attempts to diminish your light had instead illuminated it for everyone to see. Their public attacks on your character had backfired so spectacularly that you emerged with more credibility and respect than you had ever possessed before. The chosen ones recognize each other not through competition but through resonance. As your authentic power became visible to the spiritual community, others like you began reaching out, not to copy or steal, but to collaborate and co-create. The network of conscious souls that formed around you became a force for positive change that rippled out far beyond what any individual could have accomplished alone. Their story became a cautionary tale whispered in spiritual circles about what happens when you try to build your practice on someone else's foundation. But your story became an inspiration about what's possible when you stay true to your authentic path regardless of what others try to take from you. The final revelation came months later when you realized that everything had unfolded exactly as it was meant to. Their attack on you hadn't been a random act of spiritual violence, but a cosmic test that had revealed your true strength and catalyzed your destiny. They had unknowingly served as the catalyst for your greatest transformation, and for that, you felt something approaching gratitude. Today, as you read these words, you can feel the truth of your own journey resonating in every paragraph. You know what it feels like to be watched, to be copied, to be attacked by those who mistake your light for weakness. But you also know what it feels like to emerge from that darkness stronger, clearer, and more powerful than ever before. You are the chosen one who chose yourself when everyone else tried to choose for you. You are the healer who healed yourself when others tried to keep you broken. You are the light that kept shining when forces of darkness tried to extinguish you. And now, having passed through the fire of their jealousy and emerged purified, you stand as living proof that authentic power cannot be stolen, only earned through the courage to become who you were always meant to be.